Okay, yes, again, my name is Tarl. This talk is on cold treatment applications. Let me close my camera. There we go. Yeah, so just for everyone, and just to give some background, an in-transit cold treatment market is a phytosanitary application during the shipping process. And the terms of that treatment are defined in a bilateral agreement between the two countries. So it's immutable. And usually those requirements are sort of strict, but they're very specific. And then below that whole protocol is regulated by the PPCB. So in order to achieve the bilateral agreement, the PPCB runs a protocol which also is sort of strict and controlled, but that's on our side can be slightly adjusted if the right conditions are met. To achieve that, usually there's a specific pre-cooling protocol. Then temperature probes are placed into the container, and those locations are specific to each market. And then over the sailing duration, you need to meet more strict sort of temperature tolerances over that period. So a non-conformance isn't actually a failure. So no FCM or pests were found, but the protocol wasn't maintained, and that meant that certain actions had to be taken. So either it was rediverted or the container was repacked if it hadn't set sail yet, and the result is just a huge amount of lost time, wastage of facility, sort of a wastage of the cold stores, and of course money, and then our reputation as well. The other kind of non-conformance would be chilling injury. So more temperature or lower temperature had to be applied, and the fruit were damaged and possibly unsaleable. I just wanted to throw a question here. Thank you, by the way, for the previous polls. That was really nice feedback. The question here is, which cold treatment market do you perceive as being the most challenging? I've listed here on a table all the markets that I could find on Dalrad's website. So basically every requirement, and I think I've listed sort of in red China and USA, and you can kind of see why these markets, at least sort of from the feedback we get, are generally the hardest ones to perform. And the reason is just a long shipping duration requirement, very strict temperature regulation requirements, and very difficult probe placements. Let me get to the next slide. I'll answer that question. Okay, usually we see less problems with USA, and the main reason is usually just again, Cape Town has better infrastructure for cold storage, so there's less cold chain breaks over the process. China, in contrast, and I see most people have listed China as the problem area. USA and South Korea also being listed. Okay, yeah. So for China is basically it's in Durban mostly. So I've listed the graph there with all where the shipments are taking place, and yeah, less cold storage. The conditions are warmer. And there's more breaks over the cold chain, so usually between pre-cooling and shipping. So the rest of the presentation I'll direct sort of to China. Maybe we must consider South Korea as well being included later. I see there's a significant amount of votes there. We can discuss later. Just to go through the process flow, there's usually a pre-cooling event, usually 72 hours minimum. Then the pellets are removed from this tunnel, so they're moved out of this cold area. They're loaded into a refrigerated container. And then there's two sort of, well, how I perceive it, two events happening. The container is trying to cool these fruit, and then the container is also in the stacks. So it's not in our control anymore. It's usually in Transtate's control. So Mitchell had a lot of discussion earlier on this. And then, of course, it's shipped on the water and it's off. Okay, so how do these non-conformance sort of events happen? The main problem seems to be that the protocol requires the fruit to be below minus 0.6 degrees Celsius. However, chilling injury kind of, depending on the cultivar, kicks in at about minus 1.5. Freeze damage usually kicks in at minus 2. Usually to achieve fruit pulp temperatures of minus 0.6, you need to put the set point at minus 1.5. So the margins are just incredibly small. And any problem basically results in it being necessary to use a lower set point, so maybe 2 degrees Celsius for a cold blast. And if that's not done, then yeah, then it's a non-conformance event usually. Sometimes you get away with it. There seems to be a little bit of a roll of the dice. Some containers you can get away with it, others you can't. I just want to get here. Yeah, okay, I've said this. So what I'm kind of pushing here is that pre-cooling and then the loading process are absolutely critical. If we can get the fruit into the container at the correct temperature, so on protocol, and then ship it out, you have a very high chance of this container being successful. And that's again highlighted by what's happening in Cape Town with the USA program. Okay, I just want to look at the probe placement for the China containers. There's 3 probes, one at the refrigeration unit, that's probe 1, and then there's 2 in the second, or let's say the third, they usually call it pallet 18. One close to the door, one sort of nearer not close to the door, close to the wall, and then one close to the sort of the center line. And probe 3 is this one that's close to the wall. And the problem here, and this is the guy that seems to cause the most amount of problems, is that it's close to the door, so there's some warm air sometimes coming in the gaps of the door, warming that region. It's furthest from the refrigeration unit, so that means your airflow rates are lower, and your temperature has already had a chance to sort of increase in temperature before it reaches that probe. And then the other problem is that it's again close to the container wall. And I've shown some arrows there on the side to show the heat being conducted through this wall into the cartons, into the fruit. So there's a lot of factors sort of playing against this probe 3. And the reality is, if this probe 3 is not on temperature, it's very often not possible to recool it without drastic measures. Okay, so how do we fix the problem? Again, we need to ensure that the container is loaded on protocol. I'm going to explain sort of the details of this thermodynamic problem now. And then, of course, correct container setup. So during pre-cooling, no hotspots must be remaining. So we only probe maybe 2 spots or 3 spots in a pre-cooling tunnel, but obviously there's still hot spots sometimes remaining which we can't see. So that needs to be dealt with. We don't want the container loading process to be a break in this cold chain. So we don't want, after you've loaded, we don't want the fruit to increase in temperature before loading. So we want minimal heat absorption, and we want those doors immediately after loading to be closed and the genset to be activated so that it's immediately on, it's immediately going. So for pre-cooling, our suggestion here as a protocol change is to keep the minimum 72-hour pre-cooling process, which is a requirement anyway. But in addition to that, and this is where the suggestion is being made, is to include a 24-hour stabilization period. So if you look at the figure on the top right here, this is pre-cooling temperatures. It's actually the airflow entering the pallets, so at multiple pallet locations. And what you can see is there's a fast cool down process for the first day, and then you sort of see like a gradual up and down temperature shifting. So basically, what's happening here is as hotspots kind of flow out and cool, some heat sort of comes into the system, you get some fluctuations, and the indication here is that until your hotspots are removed, you get these little reverberations in the temperature. And the protocol suggestion here is that you only stop pre-cooling once your temperature is stable below target temperature for 24 hours. So if that has occurred by day 3, then it's good to go. If it takes an extra day, then you wait an extra day. And this has been kind of applied in lots of cold stores, but usually they just force a 4th day or a 5th day. Here we're trying to be more wise with our cold storage facilities and only apply that extra time when it's actually necessary. The other recommendation, so this is not a suggestion to change your protocol, but the recommendation for everyone is to use a step-down protocol. So try and keep your fruit pulp temperature 10 degrees, well, let's say warmer, or don't make your delta temperature more than 10 degrees between your air supply and your pulp temperature. And try and get that step-down process done in the first day, and then just leave it at your minus 1.5. Okay. So for the container loading process, and here's where things need to change. So please bear with me here. I've run sort of 2 scenarios on the bottom left corner or bottom left side of your screen. There's 2 temperatures. So your carton temperature, so that the carton temperature actually outside of your pallet. So imagine it's been pre-cooled now. Your whole pallet is nice and cold and ready to go. You take it out and you put it in your loading bay, which is 25 degrees Celsius. Or alternatively, you put it into a loading bay at 6 degrees Celsius, so it's being refrigerated. And we're looking at those just 2 scenarios. And then we're looking at the temperature of the cartons, which are moist, and then the outer layer of the fruit in that pallet. So the fruit that are right against the carton material. And I've tried to depict that in that picture on the right, bottom right-hand side. So you can see that the carton is already warm. It's at ambient, or it's above 3 degrees Celsius. And now your fruit on the outside are busy warming up. And generally what we see is that within the 40 minutes of loading, the next layer of fruit into the pallet don't get influenced. So only those outer layer of fruit are being warmed up first. And that's, just to point out here, that's 30% of your total pallet's volume. It's a huge amount of fruit. So they're critical. So if you look at the screen, the bottom right left here, you can see the first the cartons heat up, right, on the outside, and then that heat is dissipated into your first layer of fruit, and then they start heating up. Okay, so to continue the theme, we've also looked at another 2 scenarios. So again, also 25 degrees Celsius loading and 6 degrees Celsius loading, but here we've pre-cooled slightly lower. So instead of going to minus 0.6, we've went to minus 0.8. And we can kind of make several conclusions here. So after 20 minutes, which is probably too short for a loading event, usually need about 40 minutes. After 20 minutes, at 25 degrees Celsius loading bay, which is not exceptional for Durban port, your average temperature, so after that heat had been dissipated into your pallet completely, which would occur later on inside the container, your average mean temperature of your pallet would be minus 0.3. I've listed there's minus 0.5, sorry. So it's actually out of protocol already. You've loaded your fruit out of protocol. Your refrigeration unit in the container will have to try and cool that energy down. Usually what you'll see as well is that when you put that probe in, you load your container, everything looks fine, the temperature is fine, and then after maybe a few hours, you'll suddenly see a blimp in the temperature, and this is that heat being dissipated from the outside of the pallet into the interior of the pallet, and it's hitting that probe. In contrast to this 25 degrees Celsius scenario, if you had refrigerated your refrigeration unit, your loading bay, to 6 degrees and pre-cooled slightly lower to minus 0.8, after 20 minutes, your mean pallet temperature is just below protocol, so minus 0.7. So huge benefits here. A refrigerated loading bay solves many problems. Even up to 40 minutes, you're still below protocol. You're still ready to go, and the container doesn't have to do extra work. Okay, so the suggestions we're making to how we handle these cold treatment markets, specifically China, is that the refrigeration unit, the loading bay is refrigerated to 6. The other thing that I think is useful is when you're loading, as I mentioned, the fruit outside the pallet are heated up first. Sample those fruit during loading to see if you've exceeded sort of a failure point. And the idea here is that if you measure temperatures, fruit temperatures outside the pallet, sort of at the exposed area, that are warmer than minus 0.3, you need to stop and recool the pallets, or so redo the pre-cooling event. Otherwise, you're going to be starting this process out of protocol. So it's a really nice, easy way to do it, and it's against sort of the prior approach where people were sampling deep into the pallet. We actually should be testing outside the pallet when heat is being absorbed, just to give us indication. Okay, so second poll here. Which of the following factors do you think contribute most to the cold treatment non-conformance event? So I think in your experience and less in mine, I hope it lines up with what I've been saying, but it'll be interesting to hear your opinions. Okay, just something interesting that we saw last year, the Baffle plate inside of a container, and I've put a picture there in the bottom right. We've seen that this Baffle plate often gets knocked by the prongs of the forklifts during loading, and that Baffle plate is completely below the T-bar floor, and it's restricting cold air to enter the container. And this is something that everybody needs to watch, and please point it out to your cold stores. I'm certain this has been a result or a cause of several non-conformance events. Packaging, again, same slide as last time. Of course, it's having a big effect. As I noted previously, your display cartons are far less ventilated than the super vent cartons. So again, focus on the securing sheets, make sure the ventilation is working. I've also seen that the smaller cartons, what are they called now? The smaller cartons than these display cartons, they often get issues because they have less ventilation. Definitely, they've been part of several, or the reason for several non-conformance events. So keep an eye there. Pallet caps, this was also pointed out. Your probe 1, so right at the refrigeration unit, is at the top of the pallet, And one of the indications is that when this probe is used in conjunction with one of these pallet caps with large ventiles, that some of the warm air that's returning through the refrigeration unit can blow into the carton. And often these cartons are quite sort of, they don't have much of a height, so they're quite exposed. And if some warm air blows on them, they suddenly spike out of the tolerances, and then you get then you get temperature issues. So smaller ventiles can just stop that air from blowing into the carton. Almost done on this. Void plugs, again, a fantastic tool. I see many of the shipping lines are installing it themselves. Please just focus on this. So where do we go from here? Well, definitely, if you implement these protocol changes, you're gonna suffer less non-conformance events. So reduced costs, less sort of excessive or unnecessary usage of the cold storage infrastructure, and we're going to protect our brand. Try and implement these protocol changes into your own protocols, and I think the push is to eventually include these into the PPCB protocols so that they're controlled and regulated. Thank you very much. My contact details are on the screen.